to see. Okay, awesome. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Charles B. Rangel International Affairs Program's webinar on the many and diverse paths into the U.S. Foreign Service. We are joined by some distinguished Foreign Service officers who have been kind enough to take the time to talk to you about their unique and fascinating paths to the Foreign Service. My name is Andre Vincent. I am the program coordinator for recruitment and compliance for the Rangel program. And I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Ms. Candace Roberts. Candace, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, my name is Candace Roberts. I'm also a program coordinator for administration and congressional affairs with the program. I thank you all so much for coming to this discussion.
Awesome. Before we launch into the main portion of the meeting, I just want to give a very brief overview of the program. The Charles B. Rangel International Affairs Program honors Congressman Charles B. Rangel for his long-standing commitment to showing the world that diversity is the strength of America and of the importance of creating a diplomatic corps that reflects that diversity. Over the course of his career, he exemplified global leadership and encouraged diverse individuals to pursue a career in diplomacy, which is essential to the conduct of an effective and humane U.S. foreign policy. So the Rangel program consists of two parts: the Rangel Graduate Fellowship, which provides financial support, professional development, and mentoring for college graduates who want to pursue a career in the Foreign Service. The second part is the Rangel Summer Enrichment Program, which is a 6-week intensive program for undergraduates who want to learn more about the trends and career opportunities in international relations. So they may not know yet that they want to go into the Foreign Service or exactly what career, but it gives them an orientation and solid grounding in the skills and the trends that career opportunities in international relations. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Lawrence Randolph. Randolph, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, just trying to unmute myself. Hi, my name is Lawrence Randolph. I have been in the Foreign Service for over 20 years now. I'm currently serving as the Minister Counselor for Public Affairs. And what that means is I'm in charge of education, press, and culture, kind of between our two bilateral relationships now in Paris, so between France and the United States. I spent most of my career in the Middle East, and I'm happy to talk about that and kind of my pathway to the Foreign Service. But I'm assuming you want to keep these intros brief, so I'm going to keep it brief. Thank you.
Mr. Roberts, can you introduce yourself? Yeah.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Jay Roberts. I am on my 5th year with the Foreign Service, prior military officer. I am a logistics specialist within the Foreign Service, which has a little bit of a different entry into the Foreign Service, and we'll talk about that later. Currently, I am in the Watch, or the Operations Center for the State Department, which is similar to what you would think of like the White House Situation Room, to kind of put it in simple terms, where we do a lot of things as far as keeping the Secretary connected and reporting on current events. So thank you guys for this opportunity. I look forward to speaking with the group.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. And Mr. Kennedy?
Hey, good morning, afternoon, everyone. My name is Clinton Kennedy IV. I'm also a Foreign Service officer. I'm a management generalist. Call it career tracks, I believe, these days. Old days, we call it cones. So management career track generalist. I've been in the Foreign Service 6.5 years. I'm on my 3rd full tour, and I did a short-term TDY as well. My previous assignments were in Harare, Zimbabwe, Abu Dhabi, UAE, and Baghdad for the short-term TDY. And I'm currently working in the Arms Control Verification and Compliance Bureau, also as a watch operations officer, but it's a different watch job than my colleague, Mr. Roberts. I am living in Arlington, and I have a wife, a son, and a dog that we adopted in Zimbabwe on our first tour. Some other interesting things: I was a Presidential Management Fellow, Boren Fellow, National Security Fellow for the Boren, and I have an international MBA. And I went to Michigan, Go Blue, who won this weekend, which is very exciting. So I'm wearing my blue tie. That's all for me for now, and open to questions.
Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves to our group. And thank you all again for coming today. This is start because we had another seminar earlier this week, and one of the panelists said something so interesting. They said that the Foreign Service was the U.S. government's best kept secret. And I know that sometimes when you're back in the States, or when you explain to people, when you say, oh, I'm in the Foreign Service, you know, some people look at you like, what is that? What do you do? So Lawrence, I want to start with you. How were you introduced to the Foreign Service?
That's a very good question. My family, even after 20 years, still like thinks I work for like the Park Service. So, you know, I was introduced. So I'm from Boston. I grew up in Dorchester in public housing, and you know, no one in my family had done the Foreign Service before, right? So I didn't have kind of any background. I didn't know what it was. But I did like Spanish. And when I went to university, I wanted to do something international and study Spanish. And so I had a scholarship that you had to do a certain amount of community service for that scholarship to be able to maintain it. So I was doing my kind of community service with a friend of mine. And she said, oh, there's a former Foreign Service officer. She's going to give a speech tonight at Spelman. I was at Morehouse undergrad. She was at Spelman. And I said, okay, and I said the same thing, what is a Foreign Service officer? And she was like, just come with me. Trust me, you'll like it. And it was Ambassador Ruth Davis, who later on became a mentor and was one of the highest ranking, one of the reasons why we have this program, the Pickering and the Wrangell. And she gave a speech at Spelman that day about her career and her life and all of the places she traveled and the work that she'd done and the people she met and how she advanced U.S. policy. And after hearing her speak, I was like, that's it. Like, that's exactly what I want to do. Like, before that day, I couldn't have like named it. I was like, I want to do something kind of public service-y, but international. I want to see the world. And after hearing her, I was like, that's it. So fortunately, I saw it earlier enough, and I was able to apply for the Pickering Fellowship, which you could apply for at that time as a sophomore. I was a sophomore. I was going, and it was the beginning of my sophomore year. So I had time to prepare my application, and it was before we had, Zoom, things like this. So I don't think I had really anyone to speak to about it, other than, that's not true. There was one woman in Spelman a year ahead of us who had the fellowship. So I was able to find her on campus and kind of pick her brain about it. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of how I came into it. But again, like you said, there's so many different ways. It was an unlikely path for me. Again, where I'm from, nobody heard of it. When I told people I wanted to study international studies in Boston, they were like, how about law or medicine or something where we know you can have a job at the end of it, right? Because people don't understand. And my mother, thank God for her, was like always super supportive, always had my back. Like when I wanted to study abroad, she like figured out how to get me abroad. I was like, I didn't even tell her when our teachers were like, oh, we're planning a trip to Spain, and I was like, we're not going to Spain, like we can barely go to like the Cape. And she figured out how to get me to Spain that year. She was like, you don't worry about the money, I got this, and figured out how to get me to Spain. And that trip kind of changed my life and how I saw the world and myself in it. So that's a little bit about my story, but again, I think every story is really individual. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Clint, the same question, can you explain your path to the Foreign Service? How did you learn about what the Foreign Service was and what brought you here?
I can't say that my story is all that different. I hadn't heard about it, but found out later that we had family friends that were in the Foreign Service who no one thought about it. So for me, I was pre-med, then pre-business. I was pre-everything. But then I heard about this really cool internship in Canadian Parliament. So I went to University of Michigan. So as you know, it's basically Canada. So heard about this really cool internship at Canadian Parliament. I said, that sounds cool. Why not? So I went in to talk to the adjunct professor who ran the program just to ask questions. And when I left, she said, okay, I'm going to admit you into the program, but your resume is really terrible. And we got to improve that before I submit it. And I said, oh, I thought I was just coming for an info session. But okay, sure, that sounds great. Talked to my parents, was able to work out the finances, and went on this great internship after a semester-long class learning comparative politics. And that really gave me my bug for both politics and international work and government work as well. And so I declared for political science that very next fall semester, got on this really great listserv that I hadn't been on before, heard about an internship in DC for the State Department. And I said, oh, again, I was like, oh, this is great. Let me try to apply. And I got the internship, came to DC, and it was at a brown bag lunch that I first heard about the Foreign Service. You'd think I would have heard about it at any point leading up to that, and I hadn't. And I said, wow, this sounds great. This sounds like perfect the career for me. And so I tried to get in right in my senior year of college. I took the exam, didn't pass. Took it 2 more times, passed the 3rd time, and got to the oral assessment, which I did not pass. And so I gave up for about a decade, y'all. I'll be honest with you. And came back again after business school, and had the Boren Fellowship. It was a fellowship that sort of helped me get in the door, and helped me advance to the oral assessment only part of the exam, which I passed this time with a little more maturity and experience under my belt, and got in. And so don't give up, I guess would say. But I mean, these fellowship programs are legit an excellent way to get you in because they prepare you. They help you get in the door. And all the fellows that I've met are much better prepared starting out on day 1 of the Foreign Service than everyone else. So you're in the right place, audience.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Jay, same question. Tell us about your path to the Foreign Service.
Thanks, Candace. And couldn't have a path to the Foreign Service without my beautiful wife, Candace, who's fabulous, who's running this session here. So we were both HBCU graduates. I went into the military as an officer for about 6 years, served in Iraq, and really enjoyed being in the military. I enjoyed being a military, officer, and but I didn't get to see my kids at all. I missed the first, I got to see the first one born. We have 3 kids together. And then the next 2, I wasn't even there for their birth. So we took a step back and said, you know what, let's figure out what's best for us as a family. Let's get out of the military for a little while, and we did. But when I did, I ended up getting an early retirement because of injuries sustained during my time in the military. So got out of the military with an early retirement, went back to where I'm from, which is not the middle, but Southeast Texas, close to the Louisiana border. And to this point in my life, I'd never heard of the Foreign Service, never thought of the Foreign Service. Where I'm from, it's not really some government service outside of the state of Texas government service. You don't really think of serving the federal government. Either that or our military service is the only thing you really think of when it comes to government service. So we went back to Texas. I got a job in the petrochemical industry, started working on a graduate degree. I was making a lot of money in the petrochemical industry. But I wasn't happy. I built my life toward service, toward government service, towards a service outside to something larger than myself. So making money in the petrochemical industry wasn't, it didn't suit us as a family. It didn't suit me personally and professionally. And we just felt like we wanted to do something different. And originally we got into the military to travel the world. And again, I only got to see Iraq basically. So we decided to, let's do something different. We sold everything we had. I finished that graduate degree and we moved to Spain and bought a house in Spain. So completely randomly moved to Spain. It wasn't completely, we planned it out. Obviously we planned it out. It wasn't totally random. But the fact that we were there, we decided to buy a house, and we went to the U.S. Naval Base to do some paperwork with our residency there in Spain and with buying the house. And there was a JAG officer who was a reservist, a naval reservist, and she was doing her reserve time in Spain, tough duty, but doing her reserve time in Spain. And she was helping us with our paperwork, and we were kind of telling her our story of going through the military and then moving on our own to Spain or whatever. And she was like, you know what, you should look into the Foreign Service because I think you guys would fit. You guys would be able to adapt quickly and move around easily since you guys are able to come here and figure it out on your own as well. So that was my first time. By that point, I was maybe 32, 33 years old. First time ever even hearing about the Foreign Service. So I looked into it and saw that there was a specialist tract. So there's the generalist tract and the specialist tract. Now you guys are probably on the generalist tract, with the traditional test and then the oral assessments. The specialist tract for people who have experience. You can apply based off of your experience to become a specialist, and there's different specialties, whether it's information management, IT kind of tech jobs, logistics jobs with the general services officers, facilities management, human resources, a lot of different management jobs that have specialist tracks. And so for that, there's an application period that opens up. You apply. If you make it through the initial assessment, you get an interview, an oral assessment, and you go through the oral assessments. If you make it through, then you add it to the list and you get to come in as a specialist at some point. And so that's how I basically got to where I'm at now. One of the benefits of the specialist track, you promote a little bit faster. You come in a little bit higher grade just because, again, you have that experience that knowledge coming in. The detractor, though, is there's not a large upside to it. You're not going to become an ambassador as a specialist. You're going to work and do your thing and still serve and enjoy, have a certain level of enjoyment with life and where you're at and what you're doing. But the ceiling is kind of low. So that's where we're at. And I've enjoyed every bit of it, every minute of it. And can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you all so much for just being open and honest about your path to the Foreign Service, telling your personal experiences and what brought you here. But there's something that you have all said that sometimes people forget about the Foreign Service, because let's be honest, the lifestyle of a Foreign Service officer, it's sexy. You travel the world, you see all these different places, you go and meet these different people, but this job is about service, and all of you are public servants. Lawrence, can you define service for me and how it has applied to this position for you?
That's a good question. And I think about service a little bit differently now than I did when I was in the beginning of my career. I think, in the beginning of my career, everyone's first tour is every generalist first tour is doing a consular tour. And so that's like the reason why we have embassies overseas, is to serve American citizens in our country, right? So when, you have Americans who lost their passports or have babies or die abroad, or all of the issues that Americans, or get arrested and you need to visit them in jail, or also facilitating travel for foreigners to the United States. So kind of seeing the service from that like ground level of like what an embassy does, it really reminds you every day of like why we are overseas, right? Like, and you walk in and you don't know what's going to hit you that day, and an American calls, or I was in Egypt during a terrorist attack, and you figure out how to deal with it, like with your colleagues, obviously. And so, the service is really evident then. I think at some points, at some career fields, I'm a public diplomacy or public affairs kind of coned officer. So I've spent a lot of my time doing cultural and educational and press and media exchanges and conversations with journalists abroad. And I think sometimes you can forget that actually this is of service too, in a different way, that like having these foreign audiences understand our country and our policies prevents war. Like having our people study in each other's country and knowing each other and having conversations back and forth really creates an area of mutual understanding. Even so, when we have complicated moments in our relationship, we have a better understanding because we've already had like ground level conversations. So I think the service element of it has kind of changed. Like every job is a little bit different in the Foreign Service, and that's why I love it, because every between year and 3 years, you're moving somewhere entirely different or doing a job that's very different, or so it never gets boring. You're kind of always thinking. That's also, to me, in the beginning of my career when I was young and single and in my 20s, that didn't seem like service to me. Like moving every year or 3 years seemed like just interesting fun. Now with my husband and my daughter and that part is more service, trying to figure out where we're going to live and moving my family and schools abroad and daycare and that part of it is also, like when you're living in the States, you just sign your kids up for school or you look for a good school and they're in that school for a longer period of time. Here, every couple of years, you're navigating a whole new thing. And so that's like a personal sacrifice service. I think that wasn't the case in the beginning of my career. So there's the external service that you're doing, and it's also like how it's impacting your life and family. And you really have to think about that whole picture,
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Clinton, define service. I know it's a loaded question, but how have you defined service throughout your career?
For me, it's that service is not only obviously working in the government, right? But like Jay said, a lot of us growing up, we think military is service. Everyone calls military the service, and so for me, learning the broader definition of public service, but then also just community service, right? I mean, we're service to others, and so for me, it's a broader term, and it involves treating people fairly, treating people justly. And not being afraid to sacrifice of your time to help someone else out, whether that's through your job or through your life or through your community.
Thank you. Jay?
And just to piggyback on what Clinton says, in different arenas and different jobs, when you're overseas, a lot of your focus is external toward the partnership between your embassy and the host government that you're dealing with. But at some point, a certain group of people that have to look inwardly and make sure you're maintaining the resources, the facilities, and the morale of the community. And for myself and management generalists like Clinton, that's a big part of it as well. And it might not outwardly look like service, but it is. And we understand that, hey, our greatest resource is our people, and being able to support them and to build high morale, to be able to maintain, fabulous facilities overseas. That's a big part of that service piece too, to ensure that they have the ability to go out and conduct their missions, and most effectively be able to influence foreign policy for the American people. So that's a big part of it for me too, as well.
Thank you all so much. So I'm just going to open this to any of you who would like to answer this, because it's on my list of questions, but Lawrence had already mentioned family. You're traveling the world, you're doing all of this, and you're not alone. You have children, you have wives, you have parents that are at home, you have family that's back here in the States. So how do you balance that? How do you balance your personal life with your careers? Any of you can answer. Don't all jump in at once.
I'll take that. I mean, it's tough. It's very, very tough. Like Lawrence mentioned, you have to have that commitment to your family, to being of service to your family as well. Especially when there's a lot of uncertainty in this. I mean, we're bidding every 2 to 3 years, sometimes 4 years. Sometimes every 1 year. I'm currently on a 1-year assignment, so I'm going to bid 2 years in a row, and possibly 3 years if I get another 1-year assignment here in DC. But you have to be able to make that commitment, not only to your career and your job, but to your families as well. I've got, like I said, my wife Candace and I, we've got 3 kids, now teenagers, and it's tough. It's tough for them, and it's something that we have to explain to them all the time. That hey, we've chosen this path of life because of just what we just talked about, service. Because service is something that we were driven to do we're also driven to live overseas and see, have, adventures and see things differently than if we just stayed here in the States. And we have to explain that to them that, hey, if you decide to live a life where you stay in one place, that's totally up to you. But right now, this is what we're doing. So it's constantly a growing relationship between us as parents growing, our kids growing, and having to constantly redefine why we're doing this and what we're trying to get out of this. So it's been a fun adventure to this point, and hopefully we don't screw our kids up too much.
I will say amen to that. Clinton or Lawrence, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in. One of the things I love about the Foreign Service career is how family oriented it can be. It's not perfect, but we're getting better every day. And so, for example, my family and I struggled to conceive, but during our tour in Harare and then following up in Abu Dhabi, we were able to do fertility treatments. And so in Abu Dhabi, we actually decided to have our first child in Abu Dhabi while abroad, which, you have the option in the Foreign Service also to go back to the States. And the flight of the mother will be paid for to and from the post. And then recently, they also added a paid parental leave if you have a child after you've served for at least 1 year. And so to me, those are some of the amazing benefits. And additionally to that, you have free, usually at a private school, K through 12 education for your children. That is considered a benefit of your service. Some of the drawbacks are major though, right? I mean, if you have a spouse, especially a spouse who wants to work or has a career, it's difficult. Sometimes if you're single and you're trying to find a spouse, it can be difficult. It's not always difficult because a lot of Foreign Service officers get married from someone at their first or second posts as well. But some of those things are navigating social life, navigating family life. If you have family or children with special needs, sometimes that deserves special attention. But one of the things that I found is that the State Department will try. Someone in the State Department will try to help support you. The structures are trying to help support you, which is good. Like I said, like nothing is 100%, but at least you have some help, more help than I think you would have directly help to you if you were working in the U.S., not with the State Department. So there's a lot of good benefits, but obviously some drawbacks as well.
Thank you. Lawrence, would you like to add anything? You're muted. Yeah, let's see if we can unmute you.
Okay, I think I got it. Sorry about that. This
Oh, no problem.
me and technology. I would say, yeah, just like the two panelists said before me, the benefits are huge to your family, right? You get to travel overseas, they get an international experience, they learn different languages, they have these experiences that are, I think, life-changing. They get to operate in international schools, which are generally pretty good. But there are also really drawbacks. Not all kids thrive in that environment. It can be very hard for some people. If your spouse, like both of you said, if you're managing your spouse's career, that's been really hard for me. For me, I found it to be very frank, much easier when I was single. I was like, free agent, living my life, having a good time. And now managing a family, there's just a lot more consideration that you have to think about before you bid on a job. Like, when I first entered the Foreign Service, I was like hype. I would go anywhere. I was like, hard job. I don't care. Like, I'm ready. I'll take it, And now I'm like, well, I can't do that. Even if I'm really interested in the work and the job, I'm not going to take certain jobs because of my family. Right. And for me, I had the great honor of working for a foreign service officer. Her name is Carol Perez, also a management code officer, I believe, who was the Director General of the Foreign Service in the last administration. And she was, I was doing a special project for her where I looked at resilience and like employee resilience and, just kind of looked at how we take care of our people in general. And I have to say, some people will sacrifice a lot. Like people will sacrifice their children and their marriage and all of that for this job. And all I have to say to that is this job, I love it. I've loved it really almost every second of it, but it's not keeping me warm at night. It's not going to help me when I'm sick. It's not going to be there like your spouse and your children are going to be there for you. Right. So like my thing is like, I'm all about service. I'm here to serve. I'm happy to serve. I'm excited about it. I'm passionate about what I do, but I'm also like, I need to look out for these two people who I love, and who I'm committed to. Right. And so it has to be a balance. And so I think you really need to, think about that balance as well, like you do with any job.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to give everybody time to ask questions, but I just want to ask one more question to all of you. Was there a piece of advice that you wish you would have gotten before you entered the Foreign Service? And can you share that with this group of aspiring Foreign Service officers? Clinton, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. I think one thing that I would, so just to remind you, so I came in at 35 years old. I'd already worked in many different sectors, worked on Capitol Hill, worked in private sector, worked in business, started my own business, started my own nonprofit, worked with a lot of different people. And I think one of the things for me was that, my 20-year-old, 21-year-old self, when I interned at the State Department, a long time back in 2002, I put every employee on the State Department on a pedestal. I think one thing that I have learned is that, people are people everywhere. I'd probably say 85 to 90% of everyone in the Foreign Service is amazing. But that doesn't mean that everyone is going to be easy to get along with and that everyone's going to be easy to work with. And so that's where those skills, that's why, that's the service part, as some have said, where, you pull out those interpersonal skills, you get to know people, you work with people, and you always stay professional, even no matter what. So, and this can be with foreign interlocutors. This can be with local staff. This can be with other FSOs. This can be with anyone that you could think of that, that you may or may not get along with. I think 90%, 95% of the time, you're going to have a great time getting along with everybody, but that doesn't mean everybody, right? So people are people everywhere, and it's important to recognize that. I think that would have been helpful to know coming in.
Thank you. I think that's an important one. I personally being an EFM and having worked in missions, I think that's the most perfect advice, to remember that people are people, and in all walks of life, in all professions, that people are people everywhere, and we must remember that and have compassion for each other. Thank you so much. Jay, can you answer that same question?
Yeah, again, to piggyback on Clinton's point, that was fantastically said. And I can't say that enough. The only thing that I would add to that, for me personally, if having known that, you hear those stories, you hear that you're going to have to deal with folks once you get in and everything. But to know further that you have the power to change certain things, that you have the power to influence, that you need to go out, no matter what grade you are, whether you're a first-year officer, or you've been in for 20 years, you have the power to come out and influence, and to look your colleagues in the eye and say, hey, we can be better, we can do better. Let's move forward in this direction. So it's interesting to see, in the beginning of my career now, like I said, I've only been for 5 years, just the different impacts an individual can have on a group, whether it's the energy that you bring, the compassion you have for your colleagues, or just your professionalism and work ethic. There's so much that you can do, even at your individual level, to impact operations, and knowing that coming in, I think that'll keep people from being as intimidated by the service itself, and able to come in and really hit the ground running and get some things done. Know that there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to understand, and don't come in just trying to change stuff up and thinking you're gonna, win the war. But you do have an impact, and your voice does matter, even at the beginning of your career.
Thank you for saying that too. I always, when I listen to the eager fellows in this current cohort, I always have to remind them that it's a marathon. It is not a race, and you can't change foreign policy overnight. So thank you also for saying that. And Lawrence, lastly, any advice? You're muted again, Lawrence.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I said, I think the advice that I would have given myself when I first started was to like consciously have more fun with it. I think, people will tell you a lot that, service doesn't have to be always like hard and difficult and a trudge. And I think, people will have a lot of advice, and I had a lot of great mentors, and I'm thankful. I'm really thankful, and I feel like very blessed and fortunate to have had them. But I also think that you kind of know the kind of work and the jobs and the places that speak to you as an individual and things that you want to do. And that might not align with what other people are thinking or doing or how their career went. And I think what I always say, what I would like to remember to say to audiences that I'm speaking to, is really do what makes sense to you. Do what sounds like a fun job to you. Do what sounds interesting to you. Go to places that sound interesting to you. Because if you do that, you'll do a better job. If you're in a place that you want to be, you're in a job that you're interested in, the work is fascinating to you, you're gonna like that evaluation that is get written for you, which is how you're promoted in our organization and how you get more responsibility and able to do. It's going to be excellent because you've done something that spoke to you, right? And I think in the beginning, of my career, I was really afraid. Sometimes there's some risk, and my mentors were like, "That's gonna ruin your career. Or that's not gonna make any sense. Or that's a sidetrack." And it was all fine, And actually, maybe I should have taken a little bit more time along the way to have more fun, to be honest. Now I'm at a certain point in my career where I've gotten so senior that there's certain jobs I just can't bid on anymore. And I was like, oh man, I wish I would have been at a certain grade a little longer, like there are cooler jobs at that grade than really there are at mine, And so I would say, like just Candace just said, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and take some time to have fun with it too.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate just the whole dialogue, the whole conversation. You're so candid, just sharing your personal experiences with this group. I want to get to the questions. We have a lot of questions in the box, but a couple of them are the same. So Lawrence, this one I'm going to direct it to you since you're the more senior in the group. Have you found any areas of study for graduate school more beneficial than others? There are multiple questions that are kind of similar. Some asking about business, or some asking what graduate programs should they consider? So have you found any graduate programs better?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think honestly, like when you come into the Foreign Service, like we used to call it, I don't think it's called this anymore. We used to call it A100, your class that you entered in. My class, we had around 70 people that entered at the same time. And we had people who were doctors, lawyers, IT specialists, just out of school. We had a pizza delivery guy. You had people who were train conductors. And I was like, we talk about diversity. It's also that diversity of experience that I think makes our Foreign Service really stronger. So again, like what I said earlier, in terms of like having a good time, study something that you're going to enjoy, because the job that you are signing up to do after that is going to be so diverse. There are all of these different things. I mean, that you're going to have to pull on a little bit of economic knowledge, a little bit of sociology, a little bit of political science, a little bit of management. And so you'll have time to kind of learn specifically the law around consular. You'll have time. They'll give you time to learn specifically what you need to do whatever job you're being given. So study something that you love, study something that like speaks to you and has sense. I remember when I first went to college, Morehouse at the time was one of the few historically Black schools with an international studies program, and you could choose your kind of specialty. And I remember in the beginning, I chose economics because I felt like that sounds serious and economics, but I really hated it. I was like, I don't like these courses. They're boring to me. It doesn't really speak to like anything that I'm interested in. And so I switched to sociology and loved it, like loved studying anthropology and sociology with an international lens. And Morehouse at the time allowed that flexibility in the curriculum. And I had a really great GPA, which then allowed me to apply for the Pickering Fellowship. Whereas if I would have stayed with the economic one, my grades would have suffered because I wasn't enjoying it. So again, find something that you like to do and do that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going through the questions. They're coming really fast. So if anyone has a question, I want to also give people the opportunity to ask questions. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand and chime in on this conversation before I go to the next written question. Okay, Clinton, I'm going to let, Daniel, please, thank you.
Good. It's still morning. Good morning, everyone. My question is, with the Rango program, would we have to take the FSOT and do an assessment? That's my question.
I can answer on behalf of the program, or if Andre, you would like to answer, or I'll go ahead. Yes, it is one of the requirements within the program that you are still required to take the FSOT and FSOA.
Okay, thank you.
However, you don't have to pass the FSOT. You have 5 years. Well, you have the first 2 years that you are in graduate school, and then you have the 5 years of your service commitment to pass the FSOA. And that's important if you so that you become a tenured FSOA. So you have 7 years in which to pass the FSOA. But you do have to take the FSOT, but you don't have to pass it.
What about the assessment? Would you have to pass?
The assessment
That
is
is
the oral assessment. FSOA is Foreign Service Oral Assessment. Is that what you're referring to, Daniel?
Yes, the oral assessment.
So that is the acronym is FSOA. So that is what Andre is talking about.
Oh, okay.
Right. Additionally, for anyone who's been tracking, no one has to pass the Foreign Service Officer test anymore. Now that exam is taken with a full package, including your resume, your writing skills, to determine who gets invited to the Foreign Service oral assessment. That's separate from the Pickering and the Rango and the Payne Fellowship programs. This is just the normal process now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Clinton, I'm going to direct this question to you really quickly. So someone has a question about first tour FSOs. If you are a political foreign service officer, what percentage of work will solely be consular work, or what percentage will be devoted to your designated cone? So your most recent have gone through that process. And I know that if you can explain the process of, your first being a FAST officer and your first 2 tours being directed, and, one may be consular or something else. So can you explain that, please?
Okay, so we're expanding on the question then, Candace. That's fine.
I'm sorry. Quickly explain
that. Yes, the first. How to explain this best? Okay, so best would be Lawrence. Lawrence mentioned the A100 course. That is a mandatory orientation for all Foreign Service generalists, and Foreign Service specialists are now also doing combined orientation courses with the generalists. So that is required for everyone. That is where you learn about the State Department, you learn about the role of the Foreign Service. You get a couple of really important skills, and it's sort of basic course. After that is where you do your job training for your first assignment. So that for the majority of people is consular. And for a small subset of people, it's what we refer to as an in-cone assignment. So if you're political, it'll be political, econ. If you're a management generalist, then it would go to usually a general services officer, or maybe a human resources officer. And you would go to that assignment, and that would be your job for that period of time. So as I said in the chat, don't expect that if you're a consular officer for 2 years that you're going to be able to do half the time as a political officer. Do not have that expectation. It's important to know in the Foreign Service, whatever assignment you have, you need to do that assignment as best as you can. You need to knock the ball out of the park on that assignment. And if you happen to have some extra time, you can work with your supervisor and their supervisor to see if you can talk to another section to help out. That being said, as a first or second tour officer, there are a lot of opportunities for all of you to volunteer or be voluntold to help out for VIP visits, to work as control officers. That's sort of a logistical and planning officer, to help out for a visit. So say the Secretary of State's coming to town and they need someone to be a site officer where check-in at the hotel needs to be done flawlessly. You might be able to volunteer or be voluntold for that, or being at the airport to meet the secretary or the congressional delegation's plane. Make sure the airport isn't messing anything up, and you're there to ensure that they arrive smoothly, get through security smoothly, go to where they're going so they can make it to their meeting or their hotel smoothly. It is extremely important because you are going to be the person making your post look good. So there are lots of opportunities for that, but that's for everyone. Yeah, you're going to do the assignment that you're assigned to do, and you're going to do it well. Is the first thing. Did I answer all the questions, Candace?
Thank you.
Sure.
Before I go back to the list of questions, does anyone else have a question? I really would like to give people opportunities to speak and ask their own questions. Yes. Philemon?
Hello,
Am
I just,
correctly?
yeah,
Okay.
yes. I just kind of wanted to understand what is the Foreign Service Institute, because I've been reading about it, but I'm not really sure how that really works. And
Jay, would you like to take that one?
Sure. The Foreign Service Institute is our primary training facility for foreign service officers, whether it's generalists or specialists. It's where we hold all of our language training, all of our core classes for our cones, where you will learn your trade craft for whatever your particular job is. A lot of times in between jobs, you'll have training to get you ready for that next job, or to get you ready to move up to the next level, whether it's leadership training or, if you're a political officer going and doing the next level of tradecraft, also learning about the different regions where you're getting ready to go to as well. I saw one of the questions in the group was about language as well. Or I would say language requirements. And FSI is where you'll learn those. For my first tour, I went to Morocco and had to learn French. Right now, it's kind of a part of our bidding strategy to learn a language going into our next tour. So we've got a senior and a junior in high school. We want to stay here for one more year. If I bid on and get a position that requires a language, I'll be here for another year, going to FSI every day just to learn that language. So it's huge benefit to the department. They're constantly improving the place. If you go there now, it looks totally different than it did 2 years ago, where they've added additional buildings, additional resources, and we put a lot of money and effort into FSI, and it's a great product, and it's producing the best diplomats and foreign service corps in the world. Sometimes we actually have folks from other countries. You'll have local staff from different embassies coming all the way back here to do their training there as well. So it's a great asset for the Foreign Service.
Thank you so much. So just since we're talking about FSI, Lawrence, there's a question in the chat for you about, you mentioned studying Spanish in school. Did you learn Arabic previously to your tour in the Middle East? So can you explain that? That was directed to you.
Yeah. So no, when I came in, I had Spanish and some Portuguese. I really wanted to serve in Latin America, and over 21 years, I have never served in Latin America. But I would say that, you know, you have to be open to different things. When we came in, we had a lot of jobs opening at that time in the Middle East and North Africa, and also in China. And my career development officer, or CDO, the people who are going to help you get your first and second assignments, pretty much not only help, they basically are telling you where to go. You put together a list and you rank order what you want, and you explain to them your needs and desires. But your first two assignments are, you know, based on the needs of the service, so you can pretty much be sent anywhere. And she at the time asked me if I would be willing to learn Arabic or Chinese or Mandarin. And I said, I don't think Mandarin so much, you know, not as much of an interest of mine, just in terms of like where I want to be in the world, but Arabic, maybe, why not? You know, I'd been in Lebanon a little bit ago, and I was like, that was interesting. And sure enough, I got signed up, and my first assignment was in Egypt, in Cairo. So I had a year of Arabic before moving to Cairo, and then fell in love with the region, went to Saudi Arabia, and then studied more Arabic in Cairo again. And so, yeah, you'll have plenty of opportunities throughout your career to study language, and you don't have to come in with any language. They will teach you a language if you get a job in a certain region.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There's a question in the chat where someone asked, is the program family friendly? I would say, I mean, Andre, what do you think? I would say yes. During professional development, so the fellows, when they come in during the summer, they do a 10-week professional development. And during that professional development, we really try to make sure that we have 1 or 2 sessions where people's partners, whether you're married, unmarried, are invited and can talk to the staff and talk to panelists about the Foreign Service. So, you know, you've heard all of our panelists speak about it, that it really is a family affair. If you've made the commitment to serve your country in this way, you are also bringing your family with you. So as you start the journey with the fellowship, we do try to share as much of that information as possible. So you better prepare for this next step in your careers and in your life, and also give you multiple opportunities to ask questions and get the answers that you need before you actually enter the Foreign Service and enter A100. Daniel, can you go ahead? You can ask your next question.
Okay, Jay Roberts mentioned earlier that it's a generalist. I mean, it's a specialist. You may not have opportunity to become a diplomat. I mean, ambassador. So my question is, I'm thinking about the facilities track, facility/engineering track. But I also have a background in passports and visa adjudications. So I have the goal of becoming an ambassador one day. But if I go the facilities track, how would that impact that goal?
Well, the biggest thing, Daniel, is that coming in as a specialist, like I said, it's a lower ceiling, but you can transition to a generalist. And again, you forego the normal process of taking FSOT and going through the selection process and doing the oral assessments. There's a Mustang program and a mid-level conversion program. I'm actually, trying to do the mid-level conversion program once I reach the prerequisite amount of time in tenure. So it's 8 years as a specialist before you can transition over. I have several colleagues that have done it. It works out great because, again, you promote a little bit faster as a specialist, and then you get to keep your rank.
Thank you.
But once you lead right into a career on the other side, going full speed. So there's a lot of different options for you to continue your career if you start off as a specialist. And be able to move up through.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take one more question. I saw Suzette Your hand was raised for a second. Did you still have a question?
Yeah, hello, good afternoon. I asked the question in the chat box, but I know Lawrence mentioned talking about spouses. And can the panelists speak more about, what work opportunities are available for spouses and how, whether they're married or not, kind of what has worked for your family? Thank you.
I can talk a little bit about that. So in terms of work opportunities for spouses, in most embassies and consulates abroad, they're going to have a program that either helps support your spouses to find kind of not sometimes jobs in the local community, depending on the work agreement we have with the country isn't possible. But sometimes there'll be jobs within the mission that we have to do. Anything from being a nurse in the embassy or consulate to being an IT specialist. We have facilities people that help out that, once they get to the post, they apply for, we call them EPAP jobs or jobs for, or some are called EPAP jobs and others, the jargon doesn't matter. We have jobs within the mission that we set aside specifically for spouses. And in pretty much every embassy or consulate that I've worked in, there's always been a certain amount of people who got those jobs and have been employed through that. And then, my spouse works not in the embassy, but on the local market, not on the local market. He's had a job in Switzerland for 35 years. So, and he's not interested in leaving that job. So then what it means to me is that I have to basically try to find jobs where he can commute back and forth to Switzerland, where he works about 9 days a month. So when I put my bid list together, it's always places that have a direct flight to Switzerland, basically. And so, it's hard to kind of game that out without knowing your specific family makeup or what your spouse does. But, there are ways to make it work. When I was the number 2 at our embassy in Algiers, really tried to create as many jobs as possible in that space for the spouses, because it wasn't possible to work on the local market in Algeria. And it really does affect morale and how people feel about themselves in the work when their spouses aren't working, right? So I tried to really be creative with getting jobs for people and thinking about work that needed to be done on behalf of our mission that could be done by spouses. So yeah, I think the department is trying to do better. It's still not always easy. It's not foolproof. We have a lot of people who sometimes serve tours away from their spouses because the jobs aren't working or things like that. And it's unfortunate. I did that when we were first married. I did 1 year in Afghanistan, kind of away from my spouse where he couldn't come, but I'm not really willing to do that anymore, especially since we have a small daughter. And so, there are lots of different factors that factor into that.
Thank you all so much. We have so many interesting questions coming in, but I'm sorry, unfortunately, we are out of time. We do have 2 hands raised. If the panelists don't mind just staying a couple more minutes, just to allow these last 2 to answer the question. If not, or ask their question. If not, it's okay. Jordan, and then these are going to be the last 2 questions. And I apologize to everyone in the chat. We are not going to be able to address everyone's question. Jordan, go ahead.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
I would just like to know what expenses are associated with being a Foreign Service Officer. I know we discussed housing being covered in a previous meeting, but did you all encounter any unexpected living or moving expenses when changing posts?
I'll take this one. Yes.
I'm laughing at this one. Yes.
Yes. One of the things to think about, though, so first we'll start with what's covered, right? So 1 year, and it's not during your fellowship period, that's different 2-year period. But once you start with the Foreign Service, I can cover that. The program administrators here can talk about the program. But once you're a Foreign Service officer, you and your eligible family members, those who are on your orders, like your spouse and your children, and sometimes your parents, if you're supporting them more than 50%. They will get a flight to and from your post of assignment at minimum. You will also get 7,200 pounds shipped to your post of assignment of household goods and effects. In addition to that, you will get a minimum of, I believe it's 250 pounds of additional supplies that can be sent by air that usually arrives faster. So those are the basic moving things. If you have a bigger family, you get more of some things and the same as others, okay? A lot of posts also have what's called a rest and recuperation break, and those are typically hardship posts, where they'll pay for you for a flight anywhere in the U.S. from your post of assignment and back, or to a designated place abroad, or you can do what's called a cost construct flight, which don't really need to get into now. But basically, you get time to rest and recuperate, and the government pays for your flight, not your lodging, but your flight. In terms of unexpected expenses, say you have a pet, some of that may be covered, but not all of it. Okay. Say you don't like the airline that the government is willing to pay for, and so you want to buy your own flight. You're not going to get reimbursed for it. Or just the basic here and there, like when you arrive to a new place, you may want to buy all new spices or something like that. So those are expenses that, you're like, why didn't I bring the spices from the last place? Probably because if they're, sitting in a storage or transit for a couple of months, rats could get to them, or they might go old or something like that. So you buy all new spices, at your next post, things like that. But since you're not paying for housing abroad, you are getting a benefit there. And so sometimes you do eat a little bit of the cost, and sometimes, most of the time, you get it reimbursed.
Thank you so much. And our last question, I'm sorry, this is going to be our last question. Melise.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been super insightful. My question is very unique, I would say. Just wanted to know if maybe there's a chance that you all have seen or experienced this, where someone had a partner who was in entertainment, so almost like a public figure, so acting or singing or something like that, and how they navigated that process. Totally okay if you've never seen it, but just wanted to know.
Lawrence, I'm going to let you answer that question.
Yeah, I have seen that. When I served my second assignment in Saudi Arabia, I was working at a consulate, a pretty small consulate, and the guy who was kind of the other general, I shouldn't say the other general, so it's a pretty small group of us anyway. I was the Paul Econ person, and he was the public affairs person. He actually married a really very famous Saudi kind of talk show host. She was called the Oprah Winfrey of Saudi Arabia. She's also kind of a Grammy nominated, or what do you call it? Not Grammy, but basically award-winning, let's just say, film director, and has made a number of films. And kind of managing their careers where they have 2 kids, and she's flying all over the world to shoot these really kind of expensive Hollywood films. And, he's doing, the work of a foreign service officer overseas. Wasn't easy, but, they made it work for a period. I think he might have just recently resigned. But anyway, yeah, I have seen that before. Was there something else about the question, in terms of how they navigated it, or,
Well,
I've
more
seen
just
it before.
the opportunities that maybe the State Department or the Foreign Service has for that partner? Or is it something where it was just kind of like your partner, that they were willing to just stick to their own career?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, no, she was kind of a big name and doing her own thing before they, he was a foreign service officer, and I think wouldn't have, also a foreign national, but wouldn't have been interested in doing kind of anything with the foreign service. But, we have a lot of people whose spouses, after traveling with them for a little bit, get interested in the foreign service too, and they become tandem couples and work. We have an officer here who traveled with their spouse here in Paris with me. Now I'm in Paris, just arrived here about 3 weeks ago. She was a trailing spouse for many years, but liked the work, took the exam. Her husband is now retired and she's now working. So he's trailing her. So, we have, people take just different paths, and some people, you just never, there are a lot of different ways to do this, I guess is what I want to say. So,
Thank you.
so yeah.
That was
Hey,
helpful. Thank you.
You see it a lot now too. Before we got to Morocco, there was a couple there whose spouse, she was a YouTuber and has a pretty decent sized YouTube channel, and she's a travel YouTuber. And in our last post we had one of our spouses was a blogger, a food blogger, who based all of her content around the fact that they travel and move around as a family, and that was their jobs, and they made decent money off of it as well. And there's obviously certain sensitivities when it comes to doing things like that with the nature of us moving around security wise, but it's available to do things like that too.
And I'll chime in here. As
Thank
a foreign
you.
service officer, I actually performed in a community musical in Zimbabwe. Did like 18 or 19 performances of a musical as a lead actor. And so that was pretty exciting. So there are other opportunities for that. I mean, I had to get approval to do it, but it was approved, and I was on stage like almost a month, man, like singing and acting. So it's lots
really cool.
out there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions to everybody. And thank you again for, I would just repeat, thank you so much for taking the time to come and listen to our panel. Mr. Randolph, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Roberts, thank you so much for sharing your very personal stories about your career in the Foreign Service. I just really appreciate the time that you have given these applicants and just the contributions that you have made to the program. Our application is now open. It closes on the 28th. We always recommend, if you are applying for the Wrangle program, you also apply for the Pickering program. Someone asked in the chat, and I promised I'd explain it, that both programs are essentially the same. The foundation of the programs are the same. The only difference is with the Wrangle program, you do your first internship on the Hill. And with the Pickering program, you do your first internship with the Department of State. So that's the only difference. Otherwise, the structure of the program is exactly the same. I thank all of you for taking the time to come. As I keep repeating, thank you, thank you, thank you. But with our panelists, we couldn't do this without you. And we hope that you guys take the time and look at all of our diplomatic fellowships, whether it's the Wrangle program or the Pickering program with the Department of State, the Payne program with USID, or the FAST International Agricultural Fellowship Program. It's one of our newer fellowship programs with the USDA. Thank you all for taking the time to come today, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.